It was supposed to be a normal day, the kind where you breeze through the airport, settle into your seat, and count down the hours to your destination. But for 23-year-old Jasmine Williams, this flight was about to become anything but ordinary. Jasmine, a young black woman with a bright smile and a passion for travel, had always believed that the world was big enough for everyone to share, until this day, when she discovered just how small-minded some people could be. The chaos started quietly, almost imperceptibly. Jasmine had boarded the plane with excitement bubbling inside her. She'd been saving up for months to visit her best friend in California, a trip she had planned down to the last detail. She carried nothing but a neatly packed carry-on, her favorite neck pillow, and a heart full of anticipation. Settling into her window seat near the middle of the plane, she pulled out a book to pass the time before takeoff. But as passengers continued to board, Jasmine noticed the flight attendant, a tall woman with perfectly styled blonde hair and an icy demeanor, scanning the aisle with a sharp, almost scrutinizing gaze. At first, Jasmine thought nothing of it. Maybe this woman was just having a rough day, she reasoned, but the tension grew thicker with each passing moment. It began with small, seemingly insignificant interactions. The attendant, who wore a name tag that read Rebecca, handed out instructions with a clipped tone, her forced smile failing to mask the irritation in her voice. When Jasmine politely asked for assistance finding a spot for her bag, Rebecca's response was curt, almost dismissive. "Figure it out. The overhead bins aren't complicated." Jasmine blinked, taken aback by the hostility, but chose not to say anything. Maybe it wasn't personal, she thought. Maybe Rebecca was just overwhelmed. But then came the real turning point. As the plane filled and everyone settled into their seats, Rebecca returned, hovering near Jasmine's row. Her gaze lingered for a moment too long, her lips tightening as if she was sizing Jasmine up. Then, with an exaggerated sigh, she leaned down and said, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear, "Miss, I'm going to need you to step off the plane." Jasmine froze, confusion washing over her. "I'm sorry, what?" she asked, her voice steady but edged with disbelief. Rebecca straightened up, crossing her arms. "There's been a report about your behavior. We can't allow you to remain on this flight." "What behavior?" Jasmine replied, her voice now trembling. "I haven't done anything." Rebecca's expression hardened. "We've received complaints. Please don't make this more difficult than it has to be." Passengers nearby began to stir, their murmurs filling the cabin. Jasmine looked around, searching for some kind of support, but most people avoided her eyes. She could feel her cheeks burning with humiliation, her heart pounding as she tried to process what was happening. "I think there's been some kind of mistake," she said, standing her ground. But Rebecca was unrelenting. "Either you step off voluntarily, or we'll have security escort you off." Tears welled up in Jasmine's eyes, but she blinked them back, refusing to give this woman the satisfaction of seeing her break. "I paid for this seat. I haven't done anything wrong." Rebecca leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a cold whisper. "If you want to make a scene, that's on you. But trust me, you won't like how this ends." The cabin fell silent as everyone waited to see what Jasmine would do. Her hands clenched into fists, her mind racing. She thought about the countless stories she'd heard, the silent battles people like her faced every day, and the constant decision between standing up for yourself or simply walking away to keep the peace. But before Jasmine could respond, a voice from a few rows behind broke through the tension. "Excuse me, but what exactly is the issue here?" All eyes turned to a middle-aged man in a sharp business suit. He had a calm but commanding presence, and his tone carried a hint of authority. "I've been sitting here the whole time, and this young lady hasn't done anything wrong." Rebecca's composure faltered for a brief second before she straightened up again. "Sir, this doesn't concern you." "Actually," the man replied, his voice firm, "it does. Because what it looks asterisk-like is that you're targeting her for no good reason." The air in the cabin shifted, the murmurs growing louder now as more passengers began to speak up. Jasmine's heart lifted slightly, but the fight was far from over. Rebecca's face darkened, her jaw tightening as she glanced toward the front of the plane. "I'll be right back," she snapped, turning on her heel and storming toward the cockpit. Jasmine sat down slowly, her hands trembling. She didn't know what Rebecca planned to do next, but something told her this wasn't over. And she was right, because 7 minutes later, Rebecca returned. Only this time, she wasn't the one in control anymore. When Rebecca returned, her face was tight. Her lips pursed into a thin, unforgiving line. But something had changed. Behind her was the captain, a tall man with a calm demeanor and a name tag that read Captain H. Lewis. He exuded authority, the kind of presence that instantly silenced the cabin as passengers turned to watch the unfolding drama. Rebecca gestured toward Jasmine, her voice loud and clipped. "This is the passenger I was referring to," she said, her words pointed and accusatory. Jasmine's stomach sank. She couldn't believe this was escalating even further. Captain Lewis looked at Jasmine, his expression neutral but curious. "Man," he said gently, "I've been informed there's a situation here. Would you mind stepping off the plane for a moment so we can discuss this?" Jasmine's heart raced, but she met his gaze, trying to stay composed. "I haven't done anything wrong," she said, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "I'm just sitting in my seat, minding my own business. I don't understand why I'm being targeted." The captain's eyes softened slightly, and he glanced at Rebecca, who stood stiffly beside him, her arms crossed. "Let's not jump to conclusions," he said, his tone measured. "We just need to make sure everything is in order before we depart." Jasmine hesitated. She didn't want to cause more of a scene, but the injustice of the situation burned in her chest. Why was she being singled out? What had she done to deserve this? The man in the business suit spoke up again, his voice calm but firm. "Captain, I think it's important for you to know that this young lady hasn't caused any trouble. I've been observing the situation and frankly, I'm concerned about how it's being handled." Rebecca shot him a sharp look, but the captain raised a hand to stop her from speaking. "Thank you, sir," he said, acknowledging the man before turning back to Jasmine. "Man, I'd still like to speak with you privately, if that's okay." Jasmine felt trapped. If she refused, it might escalate even further, but stepping off the plane felt like admitting guilt when she'd done nothing wrong. She glanced around, hoping for support from the other passengers. A few people nodded subtly, their faces sympathetic, but no one else dared to speak up. With a deep breath, Jasmine stood. She grabbed her bag and followed Captain Lewis toward the front of the plane, her heart pounding with every step. Rebecca followed closely behind, her expression unreadable. As they stepped into the jet bridge, the noise of the cabin faded, replaced by the hum of the airport around them. The captain turned to Jasmine, his voice calm and professional. "Man, can you tell me your side of the story? What happened before you boarded and after you took your seat?" Jasmine recounted everything. How she'd arrived early, gone through security without issue, and boarded the plane with nothing more on her mind than the excitement of seeing her friend. "I don't understand why this is happening," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "I haven't done anything to deserve this treatment." Rebecca cut in, her tone sharp. She was making other passengers uncomfortable. "I had multiple complaints." Jasmine turned to face Rebecca directly, her frustration boiling over. "What complaints? From who?" "No one even talked to me." The captain held up a hand to calm them both. "Miss Williams, please," he said, addressing Jasmine. Then, turning to Rebecca, he asked, "Can you clarify the nature of these complaints?" Rebecca hesitated, her confidence wavering for the first time. She was acting. "Suspicious," she said finally, lingering in the aisle, looking at people's seats. It raised concerns. Jasmine's jaw dropped. "I was looking for space to put my bag," she said, incredulous. "Like everyone else was doing." The captain's brow furrowed as he glanced between them. He seemed to weigh his next words carefully. "Rebecca," he said slowly, "did you actually receive complaints? Or are you basing this solely on your observations?" Rebecca's cheeks flushed and she looked away. "I was trying to prevent a situation," she muttered. Jasmine's stomach churned. It was becoming clear that this was less about her behavior and more about Rebecca's assumptions. But before Jasmine could respond, the captain turned back to her. "Miss Williams, I want to apologize if you feel unfairly targeted," he said, his tone sincere. "Based on what I've heard, I don't see any reason to remove you from this flight." Relief washed over Jasmine, but it was short-lived. Rebecca's face hardened, and she took a step closer to the captain. "With all due respect, Captain, we can't afford to take risks. If something happens mid-flight, it's on us." Jasmine couldn't believe what she was hearing. "I'm not a threat," she said, her voice rising in frustration. "I'm just trying to get to my destination like everyone else." The tension in the air was palpable. Captain Lewis sighed, rubbing his temples as if trying to piece together a solution that would satisfy everyone. Finally, he looked at Jasmine, his expression firm but kind. "Let me speak to the gate agent and sort this out. Please wait here for a moment." As the captain walked away, Jasmine and Rebecca stood in awkward silence. Jasmine wanted to demand an explanation, to make Rebecca admit why she'd really targeted her, but she knew it wouldn't accomplish anything. Instead, she crossed her arms and stared straight ahead, determined not to let the flight attendants see how shaken she was. Minutes passed, feeling like hours, before the captain returned with another airline employee in tow, a young woman with a friendly smile and a clipboard in hand. "Miss Williams," the captain said, "this is Sarah, our gate supervisor. She'll ensure everything is resolved properly." Sarah stepped forward, a smile reassuring. "Miss Williams, I'm so sorry for the inconvenience," she said. "I've reviewed your boarding information, and there's absolutely no issue on our end. You're clear to fly." Rebecca's face turned an even deeper shade of red, but she didn't say a word. Jasmine felt a wave of vindication, but it was tempered by exhaustion. She just wanted this nightmare to end. "Thank you," Jasmine said quietly, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling inside her. "I appreciate you clarifying that." Sarah nodded, then turned to Rebecca. "Can I speak with you for a moment?" she asked, her tone professional but pointed. Rebecca hesitated before following Sarah a few steps away. Jasmine couldn't hear their conversation, but she saw Rebecca's defensive posture, the way she gestured sharply as she spoke. Sarah remained calm, her expression unreadable, but it was clear she was taking the matter seriously. Captain Lewis turned to Jasmine. "Miss Williams, you're welcome to reboard the plane whenever you're ready," he said. "If you're comfortable, I'll make sure this flight goes smoothly for you." Jasmine hesitated. She wasn't sure if she wanted to get back on that plane, to sit among passengers who had witnessed her humiliation. But she also refused to let this experience ruin her trip. She nodded slowly. "I'll get back on," she said. "But only because I've waited too long for this trip to let it be ruined." The captain smiled faintly. "Understood. Let me escort you back." As Jasmine walked back onto the plane, her head held high, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over yet. And she was right. Because what Rebecca didn't realize was that someone had recorded the entire confrontation. And that video was about to change everything. As Jasmine made her way back to her seat, she could feel the weight of every gaze on her. Some passengers looked at her with quiet sympathy, while others glanced away quickly, pretending not to notice. A few whispered to each other, their expressions unreadable. Jasmine kept her chin up, her grip tight on her bag, refusing to let the humiliation settle in her chest. The man in the business suit caught her eye as she passed, offering a small, supportive nod. "Glad you're back," he said softly. She gave him a faint smile in return, but the tension in her shoulders didn't ease. She slid into her seat, staring out the window, her heart still pounding. Rebecca had returned as well, moving through the cabin with a stiffness that betrayed her frustration. Although she kept her expression neutral, Jasmine could feel the flight attendant's resentment like a storm cloud hovering nearby. It was clear Rebecca wasn't used to being questioned or called out. The plane's engines hummed to life, signaling that takeoff was near. Jasmine exhaled slowly, trying to center herself. But as the plane began to taxi, a young woman across the aisle leaned over, her voice low but urgent. "Hey," she said, her eyes wide with concern. "Are you okay?" Jasmine blinked, surprised by the question. She hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Yeah, I think so," she replied quietly. "It's just been a lot." "I saw what happened," the woman said, her tone sympathetic. "That was so unfair. I'm really sorry you had to go through that." "Thank you," Jasmine said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It means a lot that someone noticed." "I think more people notice than you realize," the woman added, glancing around the cabin. "But honestly, I think she was trying to make you a scapegoat. Some people just can't handle their own biases." Jasmine felt a surge of gratitude toward the woman for speaking the truth so plainly, but before she could respond, the plane jolted slightly as it began to ascend. She gripped the armrest, forcing herself to focus on the present. The flight itself was uneventful at first. Rebecca avoided Jasmine entirely, tending to other passengers with a forced cheeriness that didn't quite mask the tension in her demeanor. Jasmine tried to lose herself in her book, but her mind kept wandering back to the confrontation. She couldn't stop replaying it, wondering why she had been singled out, why it had escalated so quickly. About 30 minutes into the flight, Jasmine noticed something strange. A few rows ahead, a passenger, a man in his 20s with a baseball cap pulled low over his face, was holding up his phone, pointing it toward her and Rebecca. At first, she thought he might be filming something unrelated, but then he shifted his phone slightly, angling it toward her again. Jasmine's stomach tightened. Was he recording her? And if so, why? She looked away, trying to ignore him, but the uneasy feeling lingered. As the flight dragged on, whispers began to ripple through the cabin. Passengers exchanged glances, some discreetly checking their phones. Jasmine caught snippets of conversation, fragments like video and posted already, but she couldn't piece together what they were talking about. Her anxiety grew with each passing moment. Finally, the young woman across the aisle leaned over again, her expression a mix of curiosity and concern. "I think you should know," she said in a hushed voice. "Someone uploaded a video of what happened earlier. It's starting to go viral." Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. "What?" she whispered, her voice tight with disbelief. The woman nodded. "I overheard a couple of people talking about it. They said it's already getting thousands of views." Jasmine's pulse quickened as she tried to process the information. Who would have recorded it? And what exactly had been posted? She felt a mix of dread and relief. Dread that her worst moment was now public, but relief that there might be proof of what she had endured. As if on cue, the man in the business suit leaned forward in his seat, addressing Jasmine directly. "Miss," he said in a low, reassuring tone, "I recorded everything that happened earlier. I didn't want to stand by and do nothing. If you need the video for any reason, I'll send it to you." Jasmine stared at him, her emotions swirling. "You recorded it?" she asked, her voice shaky. He nodded. "I didn't know what would happen, but I thought it was important to have proof, just in case." Jasmine swallowed hard, trying to find the right words. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice barely audible. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," he replied. "Just know that you're not alone in this." For the first time all day, Jasmine felt a small flicker of hope, but it was quickly overshadowed by the weight of the situation. If the video was already circulating online, how long would it be before it reached the airline, or even Rebecca? As if sensing her thoughts, the man added, "I didn't upload it, by the way. Someone else must have. But I'll share my copy with you when we land." Jasmine nodded, a gratitude evident in her eyes. But her mind was racing. If the video was spreading, it could change everything, both for her and for Rebecca. Rebecca, however, seemed oblivious to the growing tension in the cabin. She continued her duties, a smile as forced as ever, unaware of the storm brewing around her. But Jasmine noticed a few passengers giving Rebecca pointed looks, their whispers growing louder. The shift in energy was undeniable. As the flight neared its final hour, a sudden announcement crackled through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We'll be beginning our descent shortly. Please ensure your seat belts are fastened. and thank you for flying with us." The announcement seemed to break the spell, and passengers began preparing for landing. But for Jasmine, the descent only heightened her anxiety. What would happen once they landed? Would the airline address what had happened? Would Rebecca face any consequences? And what about the video? She glanced at the man in the business suit, who gave her a reassuring nod, and then at the young woman across the aisle, who smiled encouragingly. Their support meant more than she could express, but the uncertainty of what lay ahead still loomed large. As the plane touched down and taxied to the gate, Jasmine took a deep breath, bracing herself for whatever came next. She had no idea that the moment the cabin doors opened, her life, and Rebecca's, was about to change in ways neither of them could have imagined. As the plane came to a halt and the seat belt sign dinged off, Jasmine remained seated, her mind racing. Around her, passengers were already standing, reaching for their bags, chattering about their plans. But the energy in the cabin was different, charged with a tension that no one could fully ignore. Whispers floated through the air, and Jasmine caught fragments that made her heart pound. "Is that the woman?" Someone murmured. "Did you see the video?" Another asked. Jasmine clenched her hands in her lap, willing herself to stay calm. She didn't know what to expect when she stepped off the plane, but something told her this wasn't over. Rebecca moved briskly up the aisle, her expression tight and unreadable. Her usual air of control seemed shaken. She avoided Jasmine's gaze entirely. The young woman across the aisle leaned over again, her voice a near whisper. "I think she knows," she said, glancing toward Rebecca. "She looks nervous." Jasmine wasn't so sure. Rebecca didn't strike her as the type to admit when she was wrong, let alone feel guilt. But there was something in the way she carried herself now, stiff and hurried, that hinted at unease. The man in the business suit lingered nearby as passengers filed out, his presence steady and comforting. "I'll walk with you," he said quietly when it was Jasmine's turn to stand. She nodded, grateful for his support. As they exited the plane and stepped into the bustling terminal, Jasmine's senses were overwhelmed. The bright lights, the chatter of travelers, the hum of announcements over the intercom. It all felt surreal after the confined tension of the flight. But before she could fully process her surroundings, a commotion caught her attention. Near the gate, a small group of people had gathered, some holding their phones up, recording or scrolling. Jasmine's stomach twisted as she realized they weren't random travelers. They were waiting, asterisk for her asterisk. She slowed her steps, her breath catching in her throat. "What's happening?" She asked the man beside her, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think the video reached people here," he replied, his tone calm but serious. "Just stay with me. You don't have to face this alone." As they approached the crowd, someone called out, "Are you Jasmine?" The voice was tentative, but loud enough to catch everyone's attention. Heads turned, and suddenly all eyes were on her. Jasmine hesitated, unsure how to respond. She wasn't used to being the center of attention, let alone under these circumstances. Before she could speak, a woman stepped forward, her phone in hand. "I saw the video," she said, her tone filled with concern. "What they did to you, it's not okay. People are talking about it everywhere." Jasmine blinked, stunned. She hadn't expected strangers to care, let alone offer support. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the noise of the terminal. Another voice chimed in. "The airline needs to answer for this. Are you going to file a complaint?" Jasmine opened her mouth to reply, but before she could, a familiar figure appeared at the edge of the crowd. It was Sarah, the gate supervisor who had intervened earlier. She looked serious but calm as she made her way through the small gathering. "Miss Williams," Sarah said gently, her voice cutting through the noise. "Can I have a word with you? Somewhere private." Jasmine glanced at the man beside her, who gave a reassuring nod. Then, turning back to Sarah, she nodded. "Okay," she said, her voice steady despite the anxiety bubbling inside her. Sarah led them to a quiet corner of the terminal, away from the growing crowd. Once they were out of earshot, Sarah took a deep breath. "First, let me apologize again for everything you've been through," she said, her tone sincere. I want you to know that we take situations like this very seriously. Jasmine nodded, but her heart was pounding. What's going to happen now? She asked, her voice tinged with both fear and determination. Sarah hesitated, choosing her words carefully. The video from the flight has reached our corporate team, she said finally. They're reviewing it as we speak. I can't make any official statements yet, but I can tell you that actions are being taken to address what happened. Jasmine's breath caught. What kind of actions? She asked, her tone sharper than she intended. Rebecca has been removed from her duties for the time being, Sarah replied. There will be an investigation, and appropriate measures will follow. Jasmine felt a rush of conflicting emotions, relief that something was being done, but frustration that it had taken public exposure for her to be taken seriously. She shouldn't have treated me like that in the first place, she said, her voice shaking. I didn't do anything wrong. You're absolutely right, Sarah said firmly. And I want you to know that I'm here to support you in any way I can. If you'd like to file a formal complaint, I can help you with that. Jasmine nodded, her resolve strengthening. I do, she said. I want to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. As Sarah pulled out a tablet to begin the process, Jasmine noticed movement out of the corner of her eye. Rebecca was standing near the gate, speaking with another airline employee. Her posture was defensive, her gestures sharp. It was clear she was fighting to defend her actions, but the other employee didn't look convinced. Jasmine turned away, focusing on Sarah. She recounted everything in detail, from the moment she boarded the plane to the confrontation in the jet bridge. As she spoke, the weight of the experience settled over her, but so did a sense of empowerment. For the first time since the ordeal began, she felt like her voice was being heard. When they finished, Sarah gave her a reassuring smile. Thank you for sharing this with me, she said. We'll make sure it's handled properly. And if you need anything, legal support, counseling, anything, please don't hesitate to reach out. Jasmine nodded, her gratitude genuine. Thank you, she said quietly. As they stood to leave, Jasmine noticed the crowd near the gate had grown. More people were gathered now, their phones raised, murmurs spreading through the terminal like wildfire. She caught snippets of conversation. She's the one from the video. It's trending on social media. The airline's going to have to issue a statement. Jasmine's chest tightened. This wasn't just her story anymore. It had become something much bigger. And as overwhelming as it felt, she knew she couldn't shy away from it. Not now. Not when so many eyes were on her, waiting to see how this would unfold. She squared her shoulders, took a deep breath, and walked toward the exit. She didn't know exactly what was coming next, but one thing was certain. This story was far from over, and she was ready to see it through. As Jasmine stepped away from the gate area, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She hesitated before pulling it out, expecting a flood of messages from friends or family who had likely seen the video by now. But the number on the screen wasn't one she recognized. She debated for a moment, then swiped to answer. Hello, she said cautiously. Miss Williams. The voice on the other end was professional but firm, carrying a weight of authority that made her stomach drop. This is Alan Peterson. I'm the regional operations manager for the airline. I'd like to discuss the incident on your flight. Do you have a moment? Jasmine's breath caught. The regional operations manager. This wasn't just a routine follow-up. This was something bigger. Yes, I do, she said, keeping her voice steady despite the nervous energy coursing through her. I'm calling to personally apologize for what occurred. Alan began, his tone serious but measured. We've reviewed the footage, and I want to assure you that this is not representative of our values or how we treat our passengers. That said, there are some details I need to clarify with you directly. Jasmine frowned, unsure where he was going with this. Of course, she replied. What details? There was a pause, just long enough to make her pulse quicken. We've received additional footage for another passenger, Alan said finally. It shows an interaction prior to boarding that complicates things. Jasmine's mind raced, trying to recall every moment before she got on the plane. What could he possibly mean? I didn't understand it, she said carefully. What interaction? The footage shows a brief conversation between you and a staff member at the gate, Alan explained. It seems there may have been some miscommunication about seating arrangements, which Rebecca later referenced during the incident on board. Can you shed any light on this? Jasmine's heart sank as fragments of memory came rushing back. The gate agent had briefly mentioned something about a change in seat assignments, but it had been so minor that she hadn't thought twice about it. Could that have somehow contributed to Rebecca's behavior? I remember something about my seat being moved, Jasmine said slowly, but it was handled before I boarded. I didn't think it was a big deal. Understood, Alan said, his tone still professional, but slightly more neutral now. We're investigating whether there was a breakdown in communication between the gate team and the cabin crew. It's possible Rebecca acted on incomplete or inaccurate information. Jasmine's grip tightened on her phone. Was this their way of shifting the blame? Of trying to justify what had happened to her? Are you saying this was a misunderstanding? She asked, her voice sharper than she intended. What I'm saying, Alan replied carefully, is that we need to examine every aspect of the situation. I want to make sure we have all the facts before any final decisions are made. Jasmine felt a surge of frustration. Facts. The facts were clear. Rebecca had targeted her unfairly, and the video proved it. The facts are that I was humiliated and treated differently because of how I look, she said firmly. Whatever happened before boarding doesn't change that. There was another pause, longer this time. When Alan spoke again, his tone was softer. You're absolutely right, he said. No matter what led to the incident, there's no excuse for the way you were treated. I just wanted to ensure you were aware of everything being reviewed. Jasmine took a deep breath, trying to calm the fire in her chest. Thank you for letting me know, she said finally, though her voice lacked warmth. I hope your investigation reflects what actually happened. We'll be in touch soon, Alan replied before ending the call. Jasmine lowered the phone, her emotions swirling. Was the airline trying to cover for Rebecca, or was there genuinely more to the story than she realized? Either way, it felt like they were looking for reasons to dilute the gravity of what had happened, and that didn't sit right with her. As she walked through the terminal, the young woman from the plane caught up with her, her expression a mix of excitement and concern. Hey, she said breathlessly, did you see the latest? Jasmine blinked. The latest what? Another video, the woman said, holding up her phone. It's of Rebecca. Someone caught her arguing with another flight attendant before takeoff. What? Jasmine said, leaning closer to see the screen. The video showed Rebecca in a heated exchange with a male crew member, her gestures animated and her tone sharp. The audio was faint, but certain phrases stood out. I don't care what you think. She needs to know her place. And this isn't up for debate. The male attendant looked visibly uncomfortable, shaking his head and stepping back as Rebecca stormed away. Jasmine's stomach churned. Whatever this argument had been about, it was clear Rebecca had been on edge before the flight even began. Was it possible this tension had contributed to her behavior? Or was this simply how Rebecca operated, dominating and dismissive, no matter who was in her path? I think this changes everything, the young woman said, her voice filled with urgency. People are already talking about how it shows a pattern. Rebecca wasn't just targeting you. She's like this with everyone. Jasmine wasn't so sure. The exchange in the video seemed personal, specific. There was something deeper going on, but she couldn't quite put her finger on it. I don't know, she said quietly, her mind racing. But I think we're about to find out. Just then, her phone buzzed again, this time with a text from an unknown number. Asterisk, check your email. There's something you need to see. Asterisk. Jasmine's heart pounded as she opened her email app. A new message sat at the top of her inbox, the subject line reading, Asterisk, URGENT, evidence from flight crew. Asterisk, she hesitated for a split second before tapping it open. Inside was a single link to a file labeled Internal Nemo, Incident Report. Her pulse quickened as she clicked the link. Whatever was in this file, it was about to change everything.